I had a couple people asking me what brought a U.S. Marine to grow his hair out, get a beard, and go study artificial intelligence, governance, and educational technology in the United Kingdom. Well, it's a little bit of a story. It's a little bit of a long one. And I was trying to think of all the ways I could do it, how I should progress on it. But I realized I should just write something, and then I should turn that writing into some sort of video like this. It's going to go through a lot. I'm going to go through my time in the Marine Corps, what gave me the motivation to leave, my time getting degrees, doing master's degree programming, my journalism in the Middle East, things like that. It's going to be quick. It's going to be sweet, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what it means to, I don't know, find direction, find purpose in this life. Because, I mean, my life started out weird, man, right? I had an amazing upbringing. I was super fortunate, loving family, and then my dad OD'd, and I had to wake up and see him there and do all the CPR. And I'm at 15, right? That already knocks you into a crazy world of things. And that brought me through a whole other crazy bit of life before even getting to the Marine Corps. And I'll talk about that more in other videos. But honestly, once I joined the Marine Corps, became a Marine, and then had my time in the U.S. Marine Corps, that was a whole other story in itself. And I realized it would be interesting to kind of map that process, that absurdity, and maybe someone else who's going through those absurdities would, I'd like to apologize in advance because I am going to be reading from my computer that's right here because it's just easier that way instead of memorizing the script. I already have it all down. So if I'm looking away, I really was hoping people would just listen to this video anyway. There's not going to be any flashy, absurdities or anything like that. I spent hours editing my other videos and, I realized I just want to get the message out there. So I guess I'll start into it, dive right into what I wrote. I was 22, sitting on a cold metal bench on one of the only Marine Corps bases south of the demilitarized zone. I was waiting for an order that could have pushed my squadron across the line into North Korea. It was cold, jet engine idled somewhere past the sandbags, and the talk in the tent was that armistice negotiations were going bad, right? Peace treaty negotiations. Either we're going to cross the border or we won't. And it honestly felt like one poorly chosen sentence in Washington might decide whether thousands of young Marines stepped into a new war or went home pretending like it was never that close. And it was a slow week or two, I'm not gonna lie, but I learned something interesting. While all this was going on, there was a seed that was planted, and it was the concept that the pen is mightier than the sword, right? I'm sitting there with guns with hundreds of thousand pounds of explosive, but the policy was carrying more kinetic energy than any rifle we had. Right? I carried that lesson through the years in the Marine Corps after this, right? I was working flight lines, I was keeping F-18s alive, maintaining classified networks, I was teaching younger Marines how to troubleshoot avionics, especially when, our checklist kind of runs out, you got to figure out new things. I was learning to decode traffic and satellite issues. I realized that calm leadership, being able to sit there and relax and get good information, beat any sort of panic that people would have 9 times out of 10, even when things got really bad, just sitting down and taking a breath. Well, those mornings and midnights, they left me fluent in these crazy high pressure systems, and it gave me a clarity that really only shows up when you're dealing with metal and blood, right? It was when my contract ended, or when I decided to leave the Marine Corps, I should say, that I decided to trade fatigues for a backpack and a notebook. Obviously, it was funded by the GI Bill, and I started going to school. But during my time studying political science, I decided to take a summer abroad. There was some study abroad programs, but more importantly, I wanted to go to the Middle East, right? I had spent all this time in the military on that side of the world. I wanted to go to the journalistic, peaceful side, figure things out for myself, right? A coming to Jesus moment, so to speak. I did small little writings here or there for outlets that couldn't afford any bureaus. I interviewed families who'd never seen a microphone. I watched governments scramble to shape narratives they barely understood. I literally went across the West Bank. I went down into Egypt, up into Jordan. I talked to people all over. I would walk into bars and I literally would say, hey, what do you think about Israel and Palestine? Mind you, this was about 6 or 7 months, maybe a little bit more before everything kicked off back in October. So I was there right when it was at the boiling point. Now, the biggest thing is that while I was doing all this, I was also using AI, right? NLP tools to help me kind of research, give people a voice, do things faster, make more money, all the different things. I was exploring it, and I realized that technology had already patched itself into the political context, into the everyday lives, into our socket, and that the rise of machine intelligence would really tighten that bond over the next decade or so. Well, I ended up earning a political science degree from Flagler College, and while I was doing that, I was moonlighting in religion and international studies, studying Hebrew and the Bible and scripture and all that good jazz. And the reason I did that is culture is the firmware of law. I spent late nights teaching myself Python so that I'd never be the kind of analyst who panics at a prompt, and I started writing about how code and politics and religion mirror each other's biases, right? Seemingly completely absurd things. After that, I decided I wanted to keep doing this academic route. I still wanted to learn more. So I ended up getting into the University of Edinburgh over here in Scotland and got into a Master's of Future Governance, which I'm finishing right now. I'm just about to finish my dissertation. It was a program that's, kind of between computer science, public policy, and it was the uncomfortable intersection where I really work best, right? It's this idea of research asking how language models kind of fracture or understand moral language, or how imposed ethics fall apart without shared belief. It was looking at what participatory governance might look like when citizens and algorithms start co-authoring public record, right? One slice of my work actually ended up getting published on post-digital governance. And in that paper, I was arguing that rules without belief are just scaffolds without stone. And here's the thing, I never meant to study future governance, right? Not when I stepped off the flight line, not when I first walked into a Middle Eastern village with a notebook in my back pocket, right? But the thread was there. It was tying itself together, and it was pulling tighter every time I made a new decision, made a way forward. Every time I worked with a new piece of technology, it rippled across, everything I was doing in my life and everyone else's lives around me. At Flagler, I chased politics because it was the closest language I could find to power, or for power, right? I studied religion and international studies because you can't touch the levers of a country without first understanding its soul. And somewhere along the way, I realized the new levers weren't made of wood and iron anymore. They were silicon, digital. They were invisible, but no less dangerous. Most nights after class, I'd stay late, not because anyone told me to, because I couldn't find, or I couldn't even stand the idea of becoming just another voice, another person that walks out there and does things just to look good. And don't get me wrong, I love vanity. I'm making this video for that very reason. I hope people see me and hear my voice. But at the end of the day, I wanted to know how things actually worked from my experience, not just from a book, but I wanted to have the experience of books to be able to counter any arguments saying I hadn't spent the time in them. I taught myself Python to break the fear. I taught myself systems thinking to be able to see how bias sneaks in even when no one means it to, right? I learned political theory and all these things. I earned degrees in this just to understand it a little bit more, not to be able to learn it all, but to be able to ask better questions. It wasn't about the answers. I thought it was. I was chasing answers, but all I had was more questions, right? And that's how I found myself here. I'm writing about language models and fractured ethics. I'm standing at the edge of a world where the old structures don't hold and the new ones aren't even built yet. I'm asking if it's even possible to govern what we barely understand, trying to listen harder than I speak, trying to stay faithful to those cold mornings long ago on flight lines. I first learned that the future can pivot on choices so small that we don't even notice them, and until it's too late. Now, I don't have a perfect map. But what I do have is a decade of following the same question across continents, cables, classrooms, and even cold nights. And I still believe the work I'm doing is worth doing despite all the questions and absurdities going on. I still believe someone has to stand at the seam where policy, technology, and human need are pulling in opposite directions and stitch it together. Even if those stitches don't hold together forever. Actually, especially because they won't. So I don't know if this answered how a Marine came to here, why I studied and saw and read all these things, why I'm studying AI, artificial intelligence, governance, policy, all these things, but it might paint a picture of my motivation for them. It might paint a picture of where I'm going. At the end of the day, I just wanted to share a quick video on what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and where I came from. Because if you look at my life, it looks pretty disjointed, pretty absurd, but at the end of the day, oddly enough, it all works perfectly together. Well, at least I think it does. Until next time, friends, Catch you on the flip side.